The first time I saw Eliza was at the annual Tech Forward conference in San Francisco's Moscone Center. It was September 2021, and the tech industry was just emerging from the pandemic restrictions that had kept us isolated for so long. There was an electric energy in the air, the excitement of in-person connection after months of Zoom calls and virtual events. I was presenting SecureFrame's new encryption algorithm, a breakthrough that had taken my team and me nearly 3 years to develop. Our booth was modest compared to the tech giants surrounding us, but it drew consistent crowds interested in our approach to data security, and I remember standing on that stage, the bright lights making it difficult to see beyond the first few rows. My palms were sweaty as I clicked through my presentation slides. Public speaking had never been my forte. I was much more comfortable behind multiple monitors, fingers dancing across a keyboard in the solitude of coding. But as the co-founder of a startup seeking its next round of funding, I had learned to step out of my comfort zone. And that's how our quantum-resistant encryption manages to maintain processing efficiency while exponentially increasing security. I concluded, scanning the crowd for any signs of interest or confusion. Any questions? Several hands shot up, mostly the usual inquiries about implementation costs and compatibility with legacy systems. But then, from the front row, a woman with striking features and intelligent eyes asked a question that made me pause. Your approach to blockchain security is fascinating, particularly the way you've addressed the Oracle problem, she said, her voice carrying a subtle confidence that commanded attention. But have you considered how your algorithm might respond to side-channel attacks, specifically timing attacks on your key generation process? It wasn't just a good question. It was precisely the vulnerability my team and I had spent the last 3 months addressing. It showed not only an understanding of our technology, but a deep knowledge of cryptographic principles that few outside specialized fields possessed. After answering her question and concluding the session, I found myself scanning the dispersing crowd, hoping to spot her again. I wanted to continue that conversation, to explore her insights further. As attendees filed out, she approached the stage, extending her hand. Impressive response, she said with a slight smile. I'm Eliza Chun. I work in cybersecurity at Nexus Tech. Alex Mercer, I replied, immediately recognizing the name of her employer, a mid-sized but respected firm in the industry. Co-founder of SecureFrame, though I guess the presentation made that obvious. She laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the now emptying conference room. Your approach to the timing attack vulnerability was elegant. Most companies would have implemented additional randomization protocols, but your solution preserves processing efficiency. We ended up talking for nearly an hour, other attendees, and even my co-founder Marcus flowing around us like water around stones in a stream. Eliza understood the technical aspects of our work at a level that was rare to find outside our specialized field. Her background, as she explained it, included a computer science degree from MIT and 5 years at a defense contractor before moving to Nexus Tech. She specialized in penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. Essentially, she was paid to think like a hacker to protect companies from actual ones. Would you like to continue this conversation over dinner? I found myself asking as conference staff began breaking down the presentation area. There's a great little Vietnamese place a few blocks from here. Her smile was warm but professional. I'd like that. Let me just send a quick email to let my team know. That dinner lasted until the restaurant closed at midnight. We talked about zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption with the same passion others might discuss their favorite films or books. There was something magnetic about her mind. The way she could follow complex technical concepts and then challenge assumptions I didn't even realize I was making. I was Alex Mercer, 32 years old, co-founder of SecureFrame, a promising startup that had just secured $15 million in Series B funding for our revolutionary secure communication platform. After graduating from Stanford with a double major in computer science and mathematics, I had spent 4 years at Google before leaving with my college roommate Marcus to build something of our own. We were passionate about data privacy and had developed what we believed could be a game-changing approach to secure communications. Eliza, as I would learn over the coming weeks, was 30 years old, had grown up in Seattle with parents who had emigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s. Her father was a mechanical engineer and her mother a chemistry professor. Technology and education had been cornerstone values in her household, and her path into cybersecurity seemed almost predestined from her childhood, spent taking apart computers and rebuilding them with improvements. Our first date led to a second, and then regular meetings whenever her work brought her to San Francisco from Nexus Tech's headquarters in Santa Clara. We discovered shared interests beyond technology, hiking in the Marin Headlands, obscure documentaries, and a passion for spicy food that had us exploring every hidden ethnic restaurant in the Bay Area. 3 months after we met, when SecureFrame closed an additional funding round that would accelerate our development, Eliza suggested we celebrate at a cliffside restaurant in Half Moon Bay, under a sky scattered with stars, and to the soundtrack of crashing waves. Our relationship deepened. She understood the pressure and excitement of the startup world, offering insights and emotional support that felt like finding an oasis in the desert of entrepreneurial stress. To security in all its forms, she toasted that night, raising her glass of champagne. To finding unexpected treasures, I replied, unable to believe my luck in finding someone who seemed to understand both my work and me so completely. By spring, Eliza had moved into my apartment in the Mission District of San Francisco. Her position at Nexus Tech allowed for remote work 3 days a week, with trips to their office in Santa Clara the other 2 days. Our life together fell into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. I would often code late into the night, and sometimes wake to find she had left comments in my work, small optimizations or security considerations I had overlooked in my focus on functionality. "You're showing off," I teased one morning, finding she had elegantly resolved a recursion issue that had been frustrating me for days. "Just speaking your love language," she replied with a kiss. "Some women leave notes in lunchboxes. I leave optimized code blocks." We were married 11 months after meeting, in a small ceremony overlooking the Pacific in Malibu. The wedding was intimate, just 40 guests including our closest friends and family. Marcus was my best man, warning Eliza in his toast that she should prepare for many nights of Alex forgetting to eat because he's just fixing one more bug. Her maid of honor was a college friend named Sophia who worked for a venture capital firm in Boston and had flown in for the weekend. Eliza wore a sleek, modern dress that, like her, managed to be both elegant and practical. Her parents beamed with pride, her father shaking my hand with both of his, saying in accented English, "You take care of our daughter, but also let her take care of you." Partnership, yes? To building secure futures, together, Eliza toasted. At our wedding, clinking her glass against mine, we shared a private smile at the double meaning, our professional dedication to digital security and our new commitment to building a life together that we honeymooned in New Zealand, spending 2 weeks hiking remote trails and staying in isolated cabins where we could disconnect from the digital world that usually consumed our attention. It was there, away from screens and connectivity, that I felt our bond solidify into something that seemed unbreakable. Upon returning, we settled into our life in San Francisco. I threw myself into preparing for SecureFrame's major product launch, often coding until my eyes burned from staring at screens. Eliza was supportive and understanding, bringing me food when I forgot to eat and offering insights when I hit walls in my development process. She traveled frequently for conferences and client meetings, sometimes gone for 3 or 4 days at a time, but always returned with small gifts and stories from her trips. "We're the perfect Silicon Valley power couple," Marcus joked at a company dinner, raising his glass to us. "The security wizard and the encryption genius." I laughed along with everyone else, wrapping my arm around Eliza's shoulders. In that moment, I believed we were exactly that, a perfect match built on shared passion, mutual respect, and deep understanding. If only I'd recognized the irony in her wedding toast about building secure futures together. If only I'd known that the greatest security breach I would ever face was already living in my home, sleeping in my bed, and accessing my heart as easily as she accessed my code. The first hint that something might be amiss came 18 months into our marriage. SecureFrame had grown to 35 employees, and we were 6 weeks away from launching our enterprise security platform, the culmination of nearly 5 years of development. The pressure was immense. Our investors were expecting results, and our early adopter clients were eager to implement the system that would revolutionize their data protection protocols, that I was pulling another all-nighter, fueled by energy drinks and the particular type of focus that only comes in those quiet hours when the rest of the world sleeps. The office was empty except for me, the soft hum of servers and the clicking of my keyboard the only sounds breaking the silence. I had been wrestling with an optimization issue in our key generation module, a small inefficiency that wouldn't affect functionality but offended my sense of elegant coding. Around 2 a.m., I decided to call it a night. The problem could wait until morning when my mind was fresher. I packed up my laptop and drove home to our apartment in Pacific Heights, a recent upgrade from our Mission District place, made possible by Secure Frame's growing success and promising future. The apartment was dark when I arrived, which wasn't surprising. Eliza usually went to bed around 11 p.m. when I wasn't home, maintaining the regular sleep schedule that I could never manage to adopt. What was unusual was finding her laptop open on the kitchen counter, the screen's blue glow cutting through the darkness. Eliza was meticulous about her devices, always closing them, often locking them in her home office when not in use. She had explained it as professional habit from years in cybersecurity. You don't leave access points unattended. As I moved to close the laptop for her, a notification slid across the screen, an email with the subject line Secure Frame Update. The sender's address caught my attention. It was from a domain I didn't recognize, but the name indicated a Chinese technology company. I hesitated, torn between respect for her privacy and curiosity about why she was receiving updates about my company from an unfamiliar source. That I chose not to look further, closing the laptop and heading to bed. Eliza stirred slightly as I slept, under the covers, but didn't wake. I lay awake for some time, telling myself there were perfectly innocent explanations. Perhaps it was industry newsletter correspondence, or maybe she was keeping tabs on Secure Frame's public announcements to better understand my current stresses. After all, cybersecurity professionals constantly monitor developments across the field. The next morning over breakfast, I mentioned it casually. "Hey, I saw you got an email about Secure Frame last night. Anything interesting?" She paused momentarily, her spoon of yogurt halfway to her mouth, before continuing the motion smoothly. "Oh, that? Just keeping tabs on my brilliant husband's company. Industry intelligence is part of my job, remember? Nexus Tech likes us to stay informed about significant developments across the security landscape." Her explanation made perfect sense, and her tone was light and unconcerned. Yet something felt slightly off, a microsecond too long before her response, perhaps, or the rehearsed quality of her explanation. But I dismissed the feeling, attributing it to my own sleep-deprived paranoia and the pressure of the upcoming product launch. "Right, of course," I said, pouring more coffee. "Just seemed like an unusual source." She shrugged. "Cybersecurity is global. I have alerts set up from companies worldwide." Then she changed the subject, asking about my progress on the optimization issue I'd mentioned the night before. The incident faded from my mind as we fell back into our routine. Days stretched into weeks, filled with code reviews, investor meetings, and the 1,000 details involved in preparing for a major product launch. Eliza remained supportive as always, understanding when I canceled dinner plans to handle unexpected development issues or when I was mentally absent even when physically present. But gradually, I began noticing other small inconsistencies. Unusual work hours, for one. Eliza had always maintained a relatively predictable schedule, even with her frequent travel. Now, she was increasingly taking video calls late at night, often with her camera off, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't quite make out from my home office across the hall. "Who was that?" I asked one night, passing her office as she ended a call around midnight. "Oh, just the Singapore team," she said, closing her laptop with a snap. "Time zone challenges. They're just starting their day." Another time, I overheard her on the balcony, speaking rapid Mandarin into her phone. While this wasn't unusual in itself, she often spoke with her parents in their native language. The tone was different, clipped, professional, almost coded in its brevity. When she saw me watching through the glass door, she smiled and waved, wrapping up the call quickly. "My cousin in Taipei," she explained as she came inside. "He's considering a job in tech and wanted advice." Individually, none of these moments was cause for alarm, but together, they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uneasy. Why was she closing her laptop whenever I entered the room? Why had her travel schedule become more erratic, with last-minute trips she hadn't mentioned until the day before departure? Why was there a new, encrypted external hard drive in her desk drawer that hadn't been there before? You're being paranoid, I told myself repeatedly. This is Eliza, the woman who debugs your code at 3 a.m. and brings you coffee exactly how you like it. The woman who had nursed me through a brutal case of flu last winter, who remembered every anniversary and special date, who seemed to anticipate my needs before I recognized them myself. But the exceptions to her usual patterns continued to accumulate, like warnings in a log file. During a rare weekend, when we were both free from work obligations, we took a drive up the coast to a small inn in Mendocino that we had visited on our first anniversary. As we walked along the cliffside trails, Eliza received a call that she stepped away to take, walking far enough that I couldn't hear her conversation. She returned looking slightly tense. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes, just a potential security issue with a client. The team is handling it, but they wanted to keep me in the loop." Her smile seemed forced, and she checked her phone repeatedly. Throughout the evening, something she had always prided herself on not doing during our us time. That night, I woke around 3 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. Thinking she might be unwell, I checked the bathroom, then the small sitting area of our hotel suite. I found her by the window, the blue light of her laptop illuminating her focused expression as her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. She was using a VPN I didn't recognize, accessing what looked like a secure file transfer protocol site. "Can't sleep?" I asked from the doorway. She startled visibly, unusual for someone normally so composed, and hurriedly closed the laptop. "Just checking something for work," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Go back to bed. I'll be there in a minute." I complied, but sleep didn't return easily. My mind kept replaying the moment of panic I'd seen flash across her face, so at odds with her usual calm demeanor. The next morning, she was her usual self again, suggesting we explore a new hiking trail before heading back to the city. I tried to convince myself that my midnight observation was colored by sleepiness and the strange shadows of the unfamiliar room, but doubt, once planted, grows like a weed in the garden of trust. Over the following weeks, I found myself paying closer attention to Eliza's patterns, noticing discrepancies I might previously have overlooked. She mentioned a conference in Seattle, but I later overheard her referring to meetings in Portland. She claimed to be working late at the Nexus Tech office, but when I called there looking for her, her colleague said she had left hours earlier. Small lies. Tiny inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic enough to confront her about, but enough to create a persistent unease that began to color our interactions. I found myself choosing my words more carefully, sometimes testing her with small pieces of misinformation about Secure Frame's development timeline to see if they would appear elsewhere. The most troubling incident came 6 weeks before our scheduled product launch. I had been working from home, deep in code review, when I heard Eliza return from what she had described as a routine client meeting. She didn't realize I was home, my noise-canceling headphones and closed office door having hidden my presence. Through the open crack of my door, I saw her make a beeline for her home office, carrying what looked like a small external drive that she hadn't left with that morning. Later that evening, when I casually asked how her meeting went, she gave a vague response about standard vulnerability assessments, without specific details, unusual for her, as she typically enjoyed discussing technical challenges even when keeping client names confidential. That night, I couldn't sleep. The accumulation of small discrepancies had reached a tipping point. Was I being paranoid, seeing patterns where none existed? Was work stress making me irrationally suspicious? Or was something genuinely wrong with the woman I had married, trusted, and built a life with? I lay beside her sleeping form, studying her face in the dim light filtering through our bedroom blinds. She looked peaceful, beautiful, familiar, and yet suddenly like a stranger. The distance between us seemed to grow with each soft breath she took, and I realized that for the first time since we'd met, I was afraid of what might lie behind those closed eyelids. Everything collapsed 3 weeks before our major product launch. It was a Tuesday morning, unseasonably foggy even for San Francisco, the mist so thick outside our office windows that the neighboring buildings appeared as mere shadows. I had been at my desk since 7 a.m., reviewing the final implementation details with our engineering team before submitting the code for external security audit. My phone rang. Marcus's name flashing on the screen. My co-founder rarely called instead of texting or simply walking over to my office, so immediately I knew something was wrong. Alex, we need you in the server room. Now. His voice was tight, controlled in a way that sent a chill through me. 2 minutes later, I was standing in the cool, humming environment of our secure server facility, where Marcus and Priya, our head of security, were hunched over a terminal, faces illuminated by the screen's glow. "We've been breached," Marcus said without preamble, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a grim intensity. Priya found it during routine security monitoring. "How bad?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Priya, a former NSA cybersecurity specialist we had been lucky to recruit, turned to me with an expression that answered before her words did. "It's sophisticated, targeted, and has been ongoing for approximately 7 months. Someone's been exfiltrating portions of our code base, specifically the core proprietary algorithms that make our encryption unique." My stomach dropped as she detailed the attack. The intruder had used a combination of techniques, a zero-day exploit in one of our development environments, carefully timed to coincide with our system updates to avoid detection. They had established persistent access through a brilliantly disguised backdoor and had been methodically extracting our core intellectual property, piece by piece, focusing specifically on the elements that made our technology revolutionary. "The thing is," Priya continued, scrolling through logs on the screen, "this isn't a typical attack pattern. They knew exactly what to look for, where to find it, and how to cover their tracks. This wasn't an opportunistic hack. Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems guided this. An inside job?" I asked, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. "That's our working theory," Marcus confirmed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "The question is who, and how deep this goes." What followed was 72 sleepless hours of intensive investigation. We isolated the affected systems, established a secure environment for our investigation, and began the painstaking process of tracing the breach. We worked in shifts, fueled by coffee and the particular kind of focused anger that comes from having your creation violated. As SecureFrame's technical co-founder, I took the lead on much of the forensic work, diving deep into logs and connection patterns while Marcus handled damage control with our board and investors. The attack had originated from multiple endpoints, carefully bounced through proxy servers across Asia and Eastern Europe before connecting through a sophisticated relay system that made tracing difficult. Whoever did this wasn't just technically proficient. They had resources, patience, and a clear objective. On the third day, bleary-eyed and running on fumes, I found something that made the room around me seem to fade away. A connection pattern that appeared repeatedly in our logs, obscured but not completely hidden. An IP address that, when unmasked from its proxy disguise, resolved to a familiar location. Our home network. Specifically, connections made during times when only Eliza was there. I stared at the screen, the implications refusing to fully form in my mind. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps our home network had been compromised. Maybe someone had piggybacked on our Wi-Fi. Any explanation other than the one screaming. In my head. "Alex, you found something?" Priya asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "I need to verify this independently," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Give me a few hours." I left the office without further explanation, driving home in a daze. Our apartment was empty. Eliza was at a 2-day security conference in San Diego, or so she had said. I went straight to our home office and set up a honeypot on my development server, a section of fake code designed to look like the breakthrough we had recently achieved in quantum-resistant key generation. I added invisible watermarks to the code, digital fingerprints that would be impossible to detect without knowing they were there, but would definitively prove if the code was copied. Then I waited, telling the team I was following a lead from home. I messaged Eliza casually, mentioning that I'd finally solved a critical encryption problem that had been plaguing us and stored the solution on my home development server until I could implement it properly at the office. "That's amazing," she texted back. "I knew you'd crack it. Can't wait to hear all about it when I get home tomorrow." That night, I set up a silent alert system and a hidden camera focused on my home workstation. Then I pretended to go to bed early, claiming exhaustion from the security incident we were handling. In reality, I lay awake in our darkened bedroom, a tablet hidden under the covers showing the camera feed, waiting at 1:17 a.m. The alert triggered. Someone had remotely accessed my development server. Through the camera feed, I watched in real time. As my workstation came to life, the screen showing commands being executed remotely. The honeypot had been accessed, files copied to a secure connection that I switched to the hallway security camera feed and saw lights spilling from under our guest room door. The room Eliza used as a secondary workspace when she wanted to avoid disturbing me. She wasn't in San Diego. She was 20 feet away, stealing the very core of what I had spent years building. My hands shook as I silently slipped out of bed and made my way to the guest room door. Part of me wanted to burst in, to confront her immediately with the evidence of her betrayal. But the programmer in me, the methodical problem solver, knew better. This was just the confirmation of a hypothesis. I needed the full dataset before acting. I returned to our bedroom, the weight of realization pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I lay there planning my next steps with the cold precision that had made me a successful developer. The next morning, I left early, telling Eliza via text that I needed to get back to the security incident at the office. In reality, I went to a coffee shop with secure Wi-Fi and began executing the most important code of my life. The algorithm to understand just how deeply the betrayal went. That I contacted a digital forensics specialist I trusted from my Google days, swearing him to absolute secrecy. That evening, when Eliza texted that she was flying back from San Diego and would be home late, I had my window. The specialist met me at our apartment, and we began a comprehensive cloning of her devices: laptop, external drives, cloud storage access through her credentials. What we found shattered any remaining doubts. Eliza's, or rather, Mei Lin's, devices contained encrypted communications with Datasphere Technologies, a Chinese-backed competitor that had been trying to break into the secure communications market for years. Datasphere's founder, Li Wei-chun, was her maternal uncle, a connection she had never once mentioned in our 3 years together. Email threads dating back to before we even met revealed the truth. Target acquired. Moving to Phase 2. Wedding. Secured continued access. Transmitting key components on schedule. 3 years of my life had been a carefully orchestrated operation, and I had fallen for it completely. The woman I knew as Eliza Chen didn't exist. Mei Lin had been placed in my path at that conference deliberately, with detailed briefings on my technical interests, personality profile, and even my favorite foods and films. Our chance meeting had been planned for months. The revelation struck me physically, sending me to the bathroom to vomit as the magnitude of the deception became clear. But the most devastating discovery wasn't the identity fraud or the corporate espionage. It was finding recordings of her laughing with her handlers about how easy I had been to manipulate. "He actually thinks I'm impressed by his coding," she said in one recording, speaking Mandarin that my forensics expert translated with an apologetic glance in my direction. "Men are so predictable. Show interest in their work, laugh at their jokes, and they'll give you everything." My entire relationship, from that first conversation at the conference to our wedding vows to every intimate moment we had shared, had been a weapon aimed at the heart of Secure Frame. And I had never suspected a thing until it was almost too late. As the forensics expert packed up his equipment, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "I've worked industrial espionage cases for 15 years, he said quietly. "This is one of the most comprehensive operations I've ever seen. Don't blame yourself for not catching it sooner. This was a professional job with state-level resources behind it." His words offered little comfort as I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the life we had built together: photos from our wedding, souvenirs from trips, books we had shared. All of it now revealed as an elaborate stage set for a performance designed to steal not just my company's intellectual property, but years of my life. The woman I had loved didn't exist, and the woman who did exist had been stealing pieces of my life's work like a digital vampire, feeding them back to people who would use them to destroy everything I had built. I didn't confront her immediately. Some primal instinct for self-preservation, or perhaps the programmer's methodical approach to problem-solving, kept me from revealing what I knew. The tactical part of my brain recognized that alerting your Adversary before your defenses are in place is the surest path to defeat. Instead, I returned to the office the next morning, pulled Marcus and Priya into our secure conference room, and laid out everything I had discovered, including the devastating personal implications. Their reactions mirrored my own journey through shock, disbelief, and then cold anger. Jesus Christ, Alex, Marcus whispered, his face ashen. I was her groomsman. I made a toast at your wedding. Priya, ever the pragmatist, moved quickly to the technical and legal ramifications. We need to approach this as we would any critical security incident, but with extreme compartmentalization. The fewer people who know the full picture, the better. Together, we crafted a response plan that would address both the corporate theft and my personal nightmare. The first priority was securing what remained of our intellectual property and ensuring no further exfiltration occurred. We established a parallel development environment with heavily monitored honeypots, allowing the existing breach to continue under our observation while our Real development moved to air-gapped systems accessible only to our most trusted team members. Next came the legal preparation. We discreetly engaged David Harrington, one of Silicon Valley's top intellectual property attorneys, bringing him into our confidence with a comprehensive NDA. His reaction, after reviewing our initial evidence, was grim satisfaction. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of corporate espionage I've seen, he said, examining the forensic timeline we had assembled. But also one of the most thoroughly documented, thanks to your discovery and methodical approach. We have options here, but we need to be strategic. If she or DataSphere suspects anything, evidence could disappear, assets could move offshore, and their legal team will start constructing alternative narratives. For 6 excruciating weeks, I lived a double life that made a mockery of the deception Eliza/May had perpetrated. During the day, I worked with our core team to secure our systems, document the breach, and prepare our legal case. We tracked where our stolen code had gone, establishing clear chains of transmission from our systems to DataSphere's development environments. We identified which parts of our technology had been compromised and which remained secure, allowing us to salvage core components of our innovation while preparing for the inevitability that some would be replicated by our competitor, AT-Night. I returned home to the woman who had weaponized our relationship, maintaining a facade of normalcy that felt like acid burning through my soul. I matched her deception with my own, expressing the right mixture of frustration about our security setback at work while mentioning carefully crafted pieces of misinformation about our recovery efforts. Each false detail was a breadcrumb, traceable back to her if it appeared in DataSphere's planning. You seem distant, she said one night as we prepared dinner in the kitchen that now felt like a stage set. Is it just the security breach, or is something else bothering you? Just tired, I replied, avoiding her eyes by focusing on chopping vegetables. We're making progress, but it's taking everything I have. She slipped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her head against my back in a gesture that would have comforted me just weeks earlier. Now, it took every ounce of self-control not to flinch away from her touch. You'll get through this, she said softly. You always do. It's what makes you special. I wondered if she had practiced that line before delivering it, just as she had apparently rehearsed every other moment of intimacy we had shared. The thought made my stomach turn, but I leaned back slightly into her embrace, playing my part in this final act of our tragedy. The hardest moments were the quiet ones, lying beside her at night, feeling her breathing while I stared at the ceiling, planning the next phase of what had become the most important project of my life. Sometimes she would reach for me in her sleep, and I would have to force myself to remain still, to not recoil from the touch that now felt contaminated. During those sleepless nights, I built my case with the same attention to detail that I brought to coding. I documented every inconsistency I could recall from our relationship, creating a timeline that paralleled the technical evidence we were gathering at SecureFrame. Patterns emerged, her business trips coinciding with major developments in our code base, casual questions about my work that, in retrospect, had been carefully targeted information gathering, small lies about her background that had seemed inconsequential at the time. While maintaining this exhausting charade, I quietly prepared for the aftermath. I transferred assets to secure accounts, documented every aspect of our life together, including financial contributions to joint purchases, and built a comprehensive timeline of her espionage activities. Working with our legal team, I prepared divorce papers citing fraud and criminal conspiracy, ready to be filed the moment we moved against Datasphere, that I secured our most valuable remaining intellectual property with new protections, working with a select group of trusted developers to rebuild critical components that had been compromised. We prepared a crisis management strategy for when the story inevitably broke, including communications with investors, clients, and the broader tech community. Throughout this period, I maintained an outward calm that masked the storm raging inside me. Colleagues who didn't know the full story commented on my focus, mistaking my dissociation for dedication. In reality, I was operating on autopilot, channeling all my emotional energy into constructing the perfect response to the perfect betrayal. "You've thought of everything," Marcus said one evening as we reviewed our preparation for the final move. "It's almost frightening how methodical you've been." "I learned from the best," I replied with a bitterness I couldn't fully hide. 3 years of watching a master manipulator at work teaches you a few things about planning. The personal toll was immense. I lost 15 pounds, developed insomnia that even prescription medication couldn't touch, and found myself jumping at unexpected sounds or movements. A psychiatrist friend, brought into my confidence, recognized the symptoms of acute traumatic stress and helped me develop coping mechanisms to get through each day. "What you're experiencing is psychological trauma," she explained during one of our discreet meetings. "Your brain is trying to process a fundamental violation of trust while simultaneously managing an ongoing threat situation. It's similar to what soldiers experience in combat zones." The comparison was apartment. I felt like I was fighting a war on multiple fronts, against the corporate entity trying to steal my company's future, against the woman who had infiltrated my life so completely, and against my own tendency to blame myself for not seeing the truth sooner. AS Datasphere's announcement of their revolutionary new security platform approached, scheduled with the particular irony of coinciding with what would have been my third wedding anniversary with Eliza. We finalized our counter strategy. Every legal document was prepared, every piece of evidence backed up in multiple secure locations, every team member briefed on their role in what would be the most challenging day in Secure Frame's history. The night before we executed our plan, I sat alone in our secure conference room long after everyone else had gone home, reviewing each step of what we were about to do. Marcus found me there around midnight, placing a cup of coffee and a sandwich beside my laptop. "You need to eat something," he said, taking the chair across from me. "Tomorrow's going to require all your strength." I nodded, taking a mechanical bite of the sandwich without tasting it. "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" he asked after a moment. "We could handle the corporate side without making the personal elements so public." I shook my head. The personal betrayal and the corporate espionage are inseparable. Trying to address one without the other creates vulnerabilities they could exploit. I met his concerned gaze. "Besides, I want the truth known. All of it." I refused to carry the shame of her deception. "I'll continue and finish the story where the document left off, focusing on the revenge and aftermath as requested. Here's the rest of Code of Betrayal, a tale of tech and revenge." He nodded slowly. "Just remember that when this is over, you'll need to rebuild. Don't lose yourself in the destruction." "I won't," I promised, though at that moment, I wasn't entirely sure I meant it. The following morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost surreal after weeks of deception. I dressed carefully in the charcoal suit I reserved for investor meetings, a subtle armor for the battle ahead. Eliza, or rather, May, was still asleep when I left, having returned late from what she claimed was a client emergency. I knew from our surveillance that she had actually been in a secure video conference with her handlers at Datasphere, likely finalizing details for their product announcement, that I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. "Working early. Dinner at Accarello tonight to celebrate our anniversary, 7 p.m. It would be our last interaction as husband and wife, at precisely 9:30 a.m. Our plan moved into action with military precision. While I sat in our secure conference room with Marcus, Priya, and our legal team, two events occurred simultaneously. First, Datasphere issued their press release announcing the impending launch of Quantum Shield, their groundbreaking secure communications platform, built largely with code stolen from SecureFrame. Second, federal agents from the FBI's Cyber Division and representatives from the Department of Justice entered DataSphere's headquarters with search warrants based on the evidence we had provided weeks earlier. Similar teams arrived at 3 other locations: Nexus Tech's offices, our apartment, and a small office in Santa Clara that our investigation had identified as a communications hub for the espionage operation. By 10:15 a.m., my phone was flooded with notifications. News of the raids was spreading through Silicon Valley's networks faster than even we had anticipated. By 11 a.m., technology journalists were reporting that an unnamed competitor, us, had provided evidence of massive intellectual property theft. By DataSphere, at noon, we executed the second phase. SecureFrame issued our own press release, officially naming DataSphere as the subject of our industrial espionage claims and detailing the extent of the breach. The release included a timeline of the theft and a summary of our technical findings, carefully crafted to demonstrate the severity of the situation without revealing any remaining proprietary information. What made our press release unique and instantly viral within the tech community was the personal element I had insisted on including. SecureFrame co-founder Alexander Mercer has further revealed that the corporate espionage was conducted through a years-long personal deception, in which an agent using the alias Eliza Chun entered into a relationship and subsequently marriage with Mercer as part of a coordinated effort to gain access to the company's intellectual property. Divorce proceedings citing fraud and criminal conspiracy have been initiated. Those 2 sentences, clinical in their brevity, detonated like a bomb across Silicon Valley. Within an hour, my phone contained over 100 messages from friends, colleagues, and journalists seeking confirmation or offering support. I ignored them all, focusing entirely on executing the remainder of our plan. At 2 p.m., my attorney filed for divorce in San Francisco County Superior Court, with the full documentation of May's deception attached as evidence. By 3 p.m., she had been formally served with papers at the FBI field office where she was being questioned, a moment I had chosen not to witness personally. By 4 p.m., the story had evolved from industry news to national headline. Tech founder's wife revealed as corporate spy, screamed one headline. Silicon Valley's most devastating betrayal, proclaimed another. My phone continued to explode with notifications until I finally turned it off, focusing instead on the secure communications channel our crisis team had established. The final element of that day's strategy came at 5:30 p.m., when I gave a single, carefully prepared interview to a respected technology journalist known for her detailed technical reporting. Rather than sensationalism, I spoke for exactly 20 minutes, outlining the technical aspects of the breach, our response, and the minimal personal details necessary to contextualize the situation. I refused to be portrayed as either victim or fool, instead presenting myself as a security professional responding to a sophisticated attack. This was a state-sponsored operation using human intelligence tactics against a private American company, I explained. The personal elements, while devastating, should not distract from the larger issue: systematic theft of intellectual property that threatens innovation across our industry. That evening, instead of the anniversary dinner I had suggested in my note, I checked into a hotel under an assumed name arranged by our security team. Marcus had packed a suitcase of my essentials while the FBI was searching our apartment. As I sat alone in that anonymous room, watching the story of my personal and professional betrayal unfold across every major news outlet, I felt oddly hollow. Neither the satisfaction nor the closure I had anticipated, just a profound exhaustion that I slept 14 hours straight, the first unbroken sleep I'd had in weeks. The legal proceedings unfolded over the following months with the particular blend of excruciating slowness and sudden developments that characterizes high-profile cases. The criminal investigation expanded beyond May/Eliza and DataSphere to include several other individuals at Nexus Tech who had facilitated her operation, as well as 3 other employees at different Silicon Valley companies who were revealed to be part of the same espionage network. Our civil case against DataSphere proceeded in parallel with the criminal investigation. Their initial strategy, denying any knowledge of the espionage and claiming they had developed their technology independently, collapsed when our forensic evidence was presented. The distinctive watermarks we had embedded in our code were found, intact in their systems, providing irrefutable proof of theft. 4 months after the initial raids, Datasphere's CEO and CTO were indicted alongside Mei Lin on charges of economic espionage, theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, and conspiracy. 3 weeks later, facing mounting legal costs and the withdrawal of their major investors, Datasphere filed for bankruptcy protection. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward, given the criminal charges against Mei. The court had little difficulty recognizing the marriage as fraudulent from its inception, granting an annulment rather than a divorce, legally recognizing that our marriage had never been valid in the first place. Financial settlements were simplified by our separate finances and the comprehensive documentation I had prepared. That I attended only one hearing where Mei was present, a preliminary session for the criminal case against her. Seeing her in a prison jumpsuit rather than the carefully curated wardrobe I had known was jarring. She looked smaller somehow, her composure finally cracked by the reality of her situation. When our eyes met across the courtroom, her expression shifted momentarily from resigned to calculating, a flash of the true person behind the persona I had married. I held her gaze until she looked away. The most difficult aspect of the legal process wasn't the proceedings themselves, but the constant media attention. Despite my best efforts to focus coverage on the corporate espionage rather than my personal humiliation, the human element of the story proved irresistible to the press. I became, briefly and unwillingly, the face of corporate victimhood, a role I rejected at every opportunity. This case is about intellectual property theft, not relationship drama, I repeated in the few public statements I made. The personal betrayal is significant to me, but the corporate espionage has implications for every technology company working on sensitive innovation. 6 months into the legal process, Mei Lin accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against her co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed the full scope of the operation, Datasphere's connection to Chinese government interests, the year-long surveillance of me before our chance meeting, and the meticulous way they had constructed her background and personality to appeal specifically to me. Perhaps the most painful revelation was learning that our chance encounter at the conference had been preceded by 3 failed attempts to engineer a meeting. The woman I had fallen in love with had been pursuing me for months before I ever noticed her. Every apparent coincidence in our relationship had been orchestrated. The defendant has provided substantial assistance in the prosecution of activities that constitute a threat to national security, the prosecutor explained when announcing the plea deal. Her cooperation has led to the identification of similar operations targeting other technology companies in sectors ranging from artificial intelligence to quantum computing. With her testimony, the last pieces of the conspiracy fell into place, and I finally had the complete picture of how thoroughly I had been deceived. It brought no satisfaction, only a grim sense of closure as another chapter of this nightmare ended. 18 months after discovering Eliza's, Mei's, betrayal, I stood on the balcony of my new home in Sausalito, watching fog roll across the bay. The legal battles were largely settled. Mei Lin was serving a 7-year sentence in federal prison, with deportation to follow. Datasphere was defunct, its assets sold off in bankruptcy proceedings. Our civil suit had resulted in a substantial judgment that would likely never be fully paid, but had established important precedent for similar cases of corporate espionage. More importantly, SecureFrame had not only survived but emerged stronger. The publicity surrounding the case had ironically established our security credentials beyond any marketing campaign could have. Who better to trust with security than a company that had not only detected a sophisticated state-sponsored attack, but had documented and countered it so effectively? We had rebuilt our compromised code from the ground up, incorporating the lessons learned from the breach. The new version of our platform, launched 8 months after the scandal broke, received industry-wide acclaim for both its technical innovations and its transparency about the development process. Personally, recovery was more complicated. The psychological trauma left deep scars. I had spent 3 years with someone who didn't exist, sharing my life with a carefully constructed fiction. Every memory was contaminated with doubt. Which moments had been genuine? Had there been any real connection at all? Or was I simply the target of an exceptionally committed performance? Therapy helped, as did throwing myself into rebuilding the company. I developed a close friendship with Dr. Kavita Singh, the therapist who specialized in victims of long-term deception. She helped me understand that my inability to detect the deception wasn't a personal failure, but a testament to the resources and planning that had gone into the operation. You're experiencing something similar to what victims of highly skilled con artists go through, she explained during one session. The difference is that most victims don't have the resources you do to achieve closure and justice. Focus on that achievement, not on what you missed. Time provided its own healing. A year after the case broke, I could go days without thinking about May. 6 months after that, I could hear about similar cases of espionage without experiencing flashbacks to my own situation. Dating again seemed impossible for a long time. When I finally tried, nearly 2 years after everything had fallen apart, I found myself conducting background checks on women before meeting them for coffee, a habit I recognized as both unhealthy and understandable. I was transparent about this with the women I met, and the ones worth knowing understood. The technology community's response surprised me with its compassion. Rather than becoming a cautionary tale or object of pity, I found myself regarded as something of a reluctant expert on both corporate security and personal resilience. Invitations to speak at security conferences flowed in, and I accepted a few where I could focus on technical lessons rather than personal drama. Marcus remained my closest friend and steadfast ally through everything. He had witnessed the deception from its beginning, had seen what it cost me, and had never once suggested that I should have known better. Our partnership strengthened through the crisis, and Secure Frame benefited from our renewed commitment to its mission point 3 years after the scandal. Secure Frame was acquired by one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the world for a sum that made both Marcus and me wealthy beyond any expectations we'd had when founding the company. I stayed on for a year to ensure smooth integration before stepping away to explore new projects. As for Mei Lin, I heard only fragments about her life after her conviction. She apparently maintained that she had been coerced into the operation by family connections and government pressure, a claim that found little sympathy with the prosecution but might have contained elements of truth. The last I heard, she was still serving her sentence, having been denied early release at her first parole hearing. I sometimes wondered what had happened to the real Eliza Chun, the MIT graduate whose identity May had stolen and adapted for her cover. According to the FBI, the real Eliza had been teaching computer science at a university in Australia for the past 7 years, completely unaware that her identity had been borrowed and modified for an espionage operation. 5 years after discovering the betrayal, I finally felt free of its shadow. I had launched a new venture, a nonprofit focused on helping technology startups protect their intellectual property, and had discovered a passion for mentoring young entrepreneurs. The personal aspects of the tragedy had faded into something I could discuss with clinical detachment when necessary and ignore when not. The experience had changed me, certainly. I was more cautious, more aware of security in both my personal and professional life. But I had refused to let it define me or to surrender to the paranoia that might have been its natural legacy. On a clear evening in May, nearly 6 years after everything had fallen apart, I hosted a small gathering at my home to celebrate the public launch of our nonprofit's new resource center for startups. Among the guests was Dr. Claire Reynolds, a digital forensics expert who had consulted on our case and subsequently become a friend. As we stood watching the sunset over the bay, she asked the question most people were too considerate to pose directly. Do you ever regret how public it all became? You could have handled the corporate espionage without revealing the personal deception. I considered the question carefully before answering. Initially, I wanted the public exposure as part of the punishment, not just for her, but for everyone involved. It seemed important that the truth be known. I paused, watching a sailboat tack against the wind far below. But looking back, I think the transparency served a different purpose. It helped other companies recognize similar threats, and it helped me avoid carrying the shame of deception that wasn't mine to bear. And has it changed how you trust? She asked. It's changed how I verify, I replied with a slight smile. But not ultimately how I trust. That would have been the greater tragedy, allowing one elaborate deception to poison every future connection. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, I stood alone on the balcony, reflecting on the journey from betrayal to recovery. Silicon Valley was laid out before me, its lights twinkling in the darkness, a landscape of innovation, ambition, and constant change that mirrored my own transformation. The code of my life had been hacked, corrupted in ways I couldn't have imagined possible. But like any good programmer, I had debugged, patched, and rebuilt, creating something more secure from the lessons of failure. The woman who had been the vector for that attack was still serving her sentence, her future uncertain. The company that had orchestrated it no longer existed. And I was here, looking forward rather than back, finally free to write new code for a life no longer defined by its most devastating breach. The news alert popped up on my phone during a board meeting for my newest venture. Industrial espionage convict Mei Lin deported after completing prison sentence. A small item buried in the technology section, no longer front-page news in a world that had moved on to newer scandals and breakthroughs. That I dismissed the notification and refocused on the presentation about our latest cybersecurity tool. The past no longer had power over my present or future. I had written new code for my life, more secure, more resilient, but still open to the possibilities that make technology and life itself worth the inherent risks of innovation. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.